You could spend a lifetime in the company of Japanese people and never hear the words Wabi Sabi spoken out loud. If you open Kojian, the most authoritative Japanese dictionary available today, Wabi Sabi is nowhere to be found. There are long entries for the individual words wabi and sabi, but none for the combined term. It does exist in the spoken language, and there are a small number of books in Japanese about it, but generally, it lives in hearts and minds, rather than on paper. I can't even remember when I first came across it. It's as if I internalized the philosophy of Wabi Sabi by osmosis during my time in Japan. If you ask a Japanese person to explain Wabi Sabi, they will most likely recognize it, but will, as I've said, struggle to formulate a definition. It's not that they don't understand it, it's that the understanding is intuitive, and this is a reflection of a very different way of thinking and learning. Outside of rote academic learning, much of what Japanese people absorb is by watching and experiencing. For a logical, rational thinking Westerner, this can be challenging to grasp. We want step-by-steps, how-tos and exact translations. But offering specificity and complete explanations is not the way in Japan. To truly appreciate the wisdom in this culture, we need to be aware that it is often within the unsaid that the true message lies. Origins of Wabi Sabi. Wabi Sabi originated as two separate words, both steeped in aesthetic value, with roots in literature, culture, and religion. Wabi is about finding beauty in simplicity, and a spiritual richness and serenity in detaching from the material world. Sabi is more concerned with the passage of time, with the way that all things grow and decay and how aging alters the visual nature of those things. It's less about what we see, and more about how we see. Both concepts are important in Japanese culture, but perhaps even more fascinating is the meaning they take on when combined to become Wabi Sabi. The setting. Imagine, if you will, the world in the mid-16th century, a time of great exploration by seafaring Europeans, with the Spanish and Portuguese opening up worldwide trade routes. It was a time of colonialism and mercantilism, when many countries had national economic policies to accumulate as much gold and silver as possible. The paint hadn't long dried on Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, and David had only emerged from Michelangelo's block of marble a few decades previously, at the turn of the century. Over in England, Shakespeare was penning his latest masterpiece. China was flourishing under the Ming dynasty, and was way more technologically advanced than the West. It was also very cultured, with rumors that Chinese government officials were encouraged to compose poetry and practice calligraphy between official meetings. Meanwhile, late medieval Japan was caught up in a century of warfare and destruction. Frequent famines, fires, and natural disasters plagued the nation, taxation was high and poverty widespread. Society was so torn apart that many ordinary folk sought solace in Buddhism, which was having a significant influence on the way people lived. An emperor and court were in place, but the shogun, military leader, had the true power. The country was ruled by a class of military feudal lords known as daimyo, who established local territorial domains, wielded their power from newly built castles and installed samurai warriors in the towns around those castles to protect them and serve in their armies. The higher-ranking samurai were well-educated and powerful, and known for their extreme loyalty and dedication to the service of their daimyo lord. Zen Buddhism was popular among them, due to its emphasis on discipline and meditation. A number of the great temples of the capital, Kyoto, were home to karasansui, dry landscape gardens, said to reflect the essence of nature and inspire deep contemplation. Many samurai had developed an interest in the ritual of tea, both because of the physical boost it helped them to stay awake on long watches, and the spiritual benefit of creating moments of peace and harmony in their violent lives. They lived ready to die, so welcomed opportunities to appreciate beauty in a life that could be over at any moment. It was a time of growth for major urban areas, and Japan was seeing the rise of the merchant class. They were making a fortune as moneylenders to samurai, who were permitted to earn only a capped stipend. This industry was on the edge of the law, so merchants risked having their riches taken away at any time, meaning that they too were motivated to enjoy it while it lasted. As a result, although many ordinary people were still living in relative poverty, the ruling and merchant classes had a tendency for lavish spending. Ornate castles boasted screens embellished with gold. Extravagant social events were popular among the wealthy, particularly tea gatherings. Those in power had a penchant for Chinese tea bowls and utensils, and these were rapidly becoming status symbols. An astute observer might have sensed the emergence of conflicting ideas of tea as a spiritual experience, and utensil collecting as a showy demonstration of wealth. Now, hold that thought as we take a quick detour into the history of tea. The tea connection. To explore the origin of the word wabi, we must venture into the world of tea. The powdered green matcha tea now associated with the tea ceremony didn't arrive in Japan until 1191. It was brought back from China during the Song dynasty by the monk Myoan Eisai, who is credited with founding the Rinzai school of Zen Buddhism in Japan. Tea seeds were planted in 3 places, including Uji near Kyoto, which would remain a world-class tea producer for centuries to come. Zen, and the tea ideal, spread rapidly during this time. As far back as the 15th century, monk and tea master Murata Shuko had recognized that the act of preparing and drinking tea could be a reflection of Zen principles, and as a result he is credited with a founding role in the development of the tea ceremony. Shogun Yoshimasa, an advocate of cultural pastimes, commissioned a bespoke tea ceremony from Shuko, who used this opportunity to take tea to a deeper level. According to Okakura Kakuzo in his seminal essay, The Book of Tea, Japan would soon raise the cult of teaism into a religion of aestheticism, founded on the adoration of the beautiful among the sordid facts of everyday existence. This simplification was taken a step further by a man named Takino Ju, who studied under 2 of Shuko's disciples in the first half of the 16th century. Ju was a poet, with a talent for expressing tea ideals in verse. He made changes to the tea room to include materials in their natural state, and would later be an important influence for Sun no Rikyu, a businessman and tea master for Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of Japan's most famous warlords. In time, Sun no Rikyu would become known as the true father of tea. Simplicity as an aesthetic ideal. By the second half of the 16th century, the tea ceremony had become an important social event and an opportunity for the rich to display their wealth. Hideyoshi filled his ostentatious all-gold tea house with expensive paraphernalia, mostly imported from China. At the same time, his own tea master, Sun no Rikyu, was quietly starting a revolution, reducing the physical space of the tea room significantly to alter the fundamental principles of related aesthetic ideals, stripping everything back to what was really necessary: a space to gather, a nod to nature, a kettle and basic implements, and time for tea. At little over 3 square meters, Sun no Rikyu's intimate tea room was less than half the traditional size. The tiny windows reduced the light level to a minimum, so that guests had a heightened experience of their other senses. The host and guests were positioned so close together that they could hear one another breathing. Rikyu replaced an expensive celadone vase with a bamboo flower container, and a costly Chinese bowl with one fashioned by a tile maker by the name of Chojiro. He used a bamboo tea scoop instead of an ivory one, and upcycled a humble well bucket in place of an extravagant bronze water container. Rikyu also made the significant move of bringing in all the utensils at the beginning of the ceremony and removing them all at the end. This kept the room clear and simple, allowing the guests to settle their attention on the act of making tea, the delicate natural beauty of the carefully chosen seasonal flowers and the thought-provoking poetic calligraphy in the alcove. It was all about the shared experience, in that particular moment. In one fell swoop, Rikyu changed the culture of tea from worshipping wealth to worshipping simplicity. And the contrast with Hideyoshi's aesthetic choices could not have been more stark. It was a bold and radical step away from tradition and the general view of what was desirable. In a time of austerity among the masses, Rikyu railed against the prevailing culture of excess in the ruling classes, bringing aesthetics back to basics, to the simple, ascetic beauty that inspired reflection on the nature of life itself. The origins of Wabi. Although Rikyū did not invent the tea ceremony, in the last years of his life he brought it back to the philosophy of simplicity and natural beauty that remains important in Japanese culture today. Rikyū's tea came to be known as Wabi tea. The word wabi, which can be written or means subdued taste. It originally had linguistic connections to poverty, insufficiency and despair, from the verb wabaru, to worry or pine, and the related adjective wabashii, wretched, lonely, poor. As such, it was reflected in Japanese literature many centuries before Rikyū's time. For example, in the 8th century Manyoshu, the oldest existing collection of Japanese poetry, in Kamo no Komiai's famous short work Hojoku written in 1212 and Poetry of Fujiwara no Taika. But it was with Rikyū's tea ceremony that wabi came to represent the aesthetic value of simplicity. As an aesthetic term, the beauty of wabi is in its underlying tone of darkness. It is sublime beauty in among the harsh realities of life. As Buddhist priest Kenko wrote, 7 centuries ago, should we look at the spring blossoms only in full flower, or the moon only when cloudless and clear? Beauty is not only evident in the joyous, the loud, or the obvious. Wabi implies a stillness, with an air of rising above the mundane. It is an acceptance of reality, and the insight that comes with that. It allows us to realize that whatever our situation, there is beauty hiding somewhere. Wabi can describe the feeling generated by recognizing the beauty found in simplicity. It is a sense of quiet contentment found away from the trappings of a materialistic world. Over the years, tastes have changed and there are many decorative tea utensils available these days, but the wabi ideal remains part of the philosophy of tea in Japan. Ultimately, wabi is a mindset that appreciates humility, simplicity, and frugality as roots to tranquility and contentment. The spirit of wabi is deeply connected to the idea of accepting that our true needs are simple, and of being humble and grateful for the beauty that already exists right where we are.